Dr. Hannah's eyes opened slowly, her head pounding like someone had used it as a drum. The cold metal floor beneath her felt rough against her cheek. She tried to remember what happened, but everything felt fuzzy. The last thing she could recall was sitting in her diplomatic shuttle, reviewing research notes about alien biology, when suddenly alarms started blaring. Now she found herself in what looked like a prison cell. The walls were made of some kind of dark metal, and instead of bars there was a crackling energy field blocking the entrance. The air smelled strange, like burnt electronics mixed with something she couldn't identify. Her scientist brain immediately started working, trying to figure out where she was and how to get out. Hannah pushed herself up and looked around. This wasn't just any prison. Through the energy barrier, she could see a long corridor with dozens of other cells, and in those cells were creatures she had only seen in research videos. There was a tall, blue-skinned being with 4 arms pacing back and forth. In another cell, something that looked like a giant insect was clicking its mandibles nervously. A small, furry creature with big eyes sat huddled in the corner of its cell, clearly terrified. The realization hit her like a cold wave. She wasn't in a regular prison. This was some kind of holding area for different alien species, but why were they all here together? Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Hannah quickly moved to the back of her cell and tried to look casual. A massive figure appeared in front of her cell, easily 8 feet tall with grey, rocky skin and small, mean-looking eyes. This had to be one of the Thurians she had read about in her xenobiology studies. They were known throughout the galaxy as brutal traders who cared more about profit than anything else. The Thurian guard looked her up and down, like she was a piece of meat at a market. "Well, well, the human is finally awake," he said, in a voice that sounded like gravel being crushed. "You're going to make someone very happy, little human. Do you know how rare your species is out here in the Outer Rim?" Hannah's blood ran cold. She was starting to understand what was happening, and she didn't like it one bit. "Human females are especially valuable," the guard continued, clearly enjoying her discomfort. "Smart, adaptable, and perfect for breeding programs. The bidders are going to go crazy when they see you on the auction block tomorrow." Auction block, the words hit her like a punch to the stomach. She wasn't a prisoner of war or a political hostage. She was merchandise. They were planning to sell her like some kind of animal. But Hannah wasn't just any human. She was one of Earth's top geneticists, and she had studied alien species for over 10 years. Her mind was already racing, analyzing everything she could see and hear. The guard species, the station's design, the other prisoners. It was all valuable information. After the Thurian left, Hannah moved closer to the energy barrier. She couldn't touch it without getting shocked, but she could see through it clearly. The corridor stretched in both directions, and she started counting cells, estimating distances, and noting where the security cameras were positioned. Through a small viewport in the wall behind her, she could see stars and part of a massive space station. This had to be Nexus Station. She had heard whispers about it during her diplomatic missions. It was supposed to be a trading post, but rumors said much darker things happened here. As she watched, she saw ships coming and going, and her scientist mind began forming a plan. The next morning, Hannah was dragged from her cell by 2 Thurian guards. Her wrists were bound with energy cuffs that hummed with electricity, making her hands tingle. They marched her through long corridors filled with the sounds of alien voices chattering excitedly. The air grew thicker as they walked, heavy with the smell of different alien species all crowded together. When the massive doors opened, Hannah's jaw nearly dropped. The auction hall was enormous, easily the size of 3 football fields. Hundreds of seats rose up in circles around a central platform, and almost every seat was filled. She had never seen so many different alien species in one place. There were tall, snake-like creatures, with scales that shifted colors as they moved. Beings that looked like they were made entirely of crystal sat perfectly still, light refracting through their bodies in rainbow patterns. In one section, she spotted creatures that seemed to be made of living metal, their surfaces gleaming under the bright lights. The noise was incredible. Different species were making sounds she couldn't even describe, some clicking, others humming, and a few producing what sounded like electronic beeps. Translators worn around necks or attached to heads were working overtime, turning the chaos into something resembling conversation. A Thurian auctioneer stood on the central platform, his voice booming through speakers positioned around the hall. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings of all species, welcome to today's premium auction." Hana was pushed up a ramp onto the platform. Bright lights immediately focused on her, making her squint. She felt like an animal in a zoo, with hundreds of alien eyes studying her every move. But instead of feeling helpless, she used this opportunity to study them right back. "Lot number 847, the auctioneer announced. "A prime human female, captured from a diplomatic vessel. Notice the excellent condition, no visible scars, all limbs intact, and most importantly, genetic material completely unaltered." Hana's stomach turned as the auctioneer spoke about her like she was a prized livestock animal. But she forced herself to stay calm and keep observing. "Humans, as you all know, are incredibly rare in this sector of the galaxy," the auctioneer continued. "This specimen shows all the traits that make humans so valuable: high intelligence, remarkable adaptability, and excellent breeding potential." A section of reptilian creatures began hissing loudly, apparently their way of showing interest. One of them, covered in dark green scales with bright yellow eyes, raised what looked like a paddle with strange symbols on it. "Excellent. Our Sauron. Friends start us at 50,000 credits, the auctioneer called out. Immediately, the crystal beings began making a sound like wind chimes. Their bid translator announced 100,000 credits. The reptilian creatures hissed louder and raised their bid. Within minutes, numbers were flying around the room faster than Hana could follow. She watched carefully as different species competed for her. Some seemed excited by the auctioneer's talk about her intelligence. Others appeared more interested when he mentioned adaptability. It was disgusting, but it was also information she could use. Then something caught her attention. In the very back corner of the hall, almost hidden in the shadows, sat a small figure. While everyone else was waving paddles and making noise, this being simply raised one finger occasionally. Not frantically like the others, just a calm, single gesture. The figure was much smaller than most of the other bidders, and from what Hana could see, they looked almost human-sized. Their skin appeared to be a pale blue color, and they wore simple, worn-looking clothes, nothing like the fancy outfits the other bidders had on. What struck Hana most was how calm this figure seemed while chaos erupted around them. The bidding war was getting completely out of control. Numbers were flying so fast that even the auctioneer was having trouble keeping up. The reptilian Sauron merchant was now at 3 million credits, while the crystal beings had countered with 3.5 million. Other species were jumping in with bids that made Hana's head spin. She watched as aliens became more and more aggressive, some standing up and shouting in their native languages. A few looked ready to start fighting each other right there in the auction hall. The Thurian guards positioned around the room moved closer to their weapons, clearly nervous about the crowd getting out of hand. But Hana wasn't paying attention to the chaos anymore. Her eyes were locked on that small figure in the back corner. Every time someone made a massive bid, this person would calmly raise one finger, not shouting, not waving a paddle frantically, just a simple, quiet gesture that somehow kept them in the running. The auctioneer called out, 4 million credits from the Vorthen delegation. Do I hear 4.5? The small figure raised their finger again. 4.5 million from bidder 779. That's when Hana made her decision. She had been studying galactic law for years as part of her diplomatic training, and she remembered something most people had forgotten. Something so old that even many lawyers didn't know about it anymore. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. On the platform. "Stop!" she shouted as loud as she could. The entire hall went silent. Hundreds of alien faces turned to stare at her in shock. Even the auctioneer looked confused. "I invoke Article 12 of the Galactic Commerce Code," Hana announced, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Most of them were looking around at each other, clearly having no idea what she was talking about. But a few of the older beings, particularly some in expensive legal robes, suddenly sat up straighter. The auctioneer looked annoyed. The merchandise does not have the right to speak during auction proceedings. Actually, I do, Hana replied firmly. Article 12 states that any being proven to possess sentient intelligence has the right to choose their own buyer, provided they can demonstrate legal standing and pay the symbolic fee of 1 credit. Now the hall erupted in a completely different way. Angry shouts came from every direction. The Sauron merchant was hissing furiously, while the crystal beings made sounds like breaking glass. Several buyers were on their feet, demanding that security remove her from the platform. But some of the legal advisors in the crowd were frantically checking their electronic law books. One of them, a tall being with tentacles instead of arms, stood up slowly. "The human is correct," the lawyer announced. "Article 12 is ancient, but it has never been officially repealed. If she can prove sentience and legal standing, the law must be honored." The crowd went absolutely wild. Some aliens were shouting that it was impossible, others were demanding their money back. A few looked like they were ready to storm the platform and take Hana by force. Security guards moved in closer, but they looked confused and uncertain. This clearly wasn't something that happened every day. Hana pointed directly at the small figure in the back corner. "I choose bidder 779. Now everyone turned to look at the figure she was pointing at. The being stood up slowly, and Hana could see them more clearly. They were definitely humanoid, with pale blue skin and large, gentle eyes. Their clothes were simple work coveralls, the kind maintenance workers wore. The crowd's reaction was immediate and explosive. This wasn't just any bidder. This was clearly someone from the station's lower levels. Someone who cleaned toilets and fixed broken equipment. In the eyes of most of these wealthy aliens, this person was barely better than property themselves. "This is outrageous," the Sauron merchant hissed. "She cannot choose a mere janitor over legitimate buyers." But the tentacled lawyer was checking his books again. "The law makes no distinction based on the chosen buyer's social status. If the article is invoked correctly, it must be honored." The small blue figure, Vex, according to his work badge, looked absolutely terrified as hundreds of angry alien eyes focused on him. After hours of legal arguments and angry protests, the station's legal department finally confirmed that Article 12 was valid. The wealthy bidders left the auction hall furious, making threats and demanding investigations. But the law was the law, and Hana now officially belonged to Vex. The small, blue-skinned maintenance worker looked absolutely terrified as station security escorted them both through the corridors. His hands were shaking, and he kept glancing around nervously like he expected someone to attack them at any moment. They rode a cargo elevator down to the lowest levels of the station, far below where the wealthy aliens lived, and conducted their business. The walls here were plain metal, with exposed pipes and cables running everywhere. The air smelled of machine oil and recycled atmosphere. This was clearly where the station's working class lived. Vex's quarters were tiny, just a small room with a bed, a desk, and basic facilities. He sat down heavily on his bed and put his head in his hands. "I can't believe what just happened," he said in accented English. "I never thought... I only bid once. Just once. It was stupid." Hana sat down across from him, studying his face. "Why did you bid at all?" Vex looked up at her with large, sad eyes. "My people, the Kalani, we've been servants and workers for centuries. When I saw all those rich beings fighting over you like you were just a thing to be owned, it made me angry. So I raised my finger once just to say that even someone like me could participate." "Someone like you?" "A nobody. A janitor. My species. Is considered barely intelligent by most of the galaxy. We're allowed to do maintenance work and cleaning, but that's about it. Nobody takes us seriously." Hana leaned forward. "Vex, I need to tell you something important. I'm not really a diplomat." His eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "I'm Dr. Hana Kim, and I work for Earth's Intelligence Division. I've been tracking a criminal organization that's been kidnapping people from different planets. My capture wasn't an accident. I let them take me so I could get inside their operation." Vex stared at her in shock. "You wanted to be captured?" "The hard part was getting to this station. Now I need to access their computer systems to gather evidence. But there's a problem. All the main computer terminals are in restricted areas that only certain people can access. Like maintenance workers, Vex said slowly, beginning to understand. Exactly. You have access to areas that even wealthy bidders can't get into. Service tunnels, computer rooms, power centers, places where the real information is stored. Vex was quiet for a long moment. You're asking me to help you break into restricted areas. If we get caught, they'll kill both of us. I know it's dangerous, but Vex, these people aren't just selling slaves. They're doing something much worse. I need to find out what, and I need proof that the galaxy will believe. That night they began their infiltration. Vex led Hannah through maintenance tunnels she never would have found on her own. The passages were narrow and dark, lit only by emergency lighting. They crawled through spaces between walls and climbed up service shafts that connected different levels of the station. How do you know all these routes? Hannah whispered as they squeezed through a particularly tight passage. When you're invisible to most people, you learn to move around without being seen, Vex replied. They reached their first target, a secondary computer terminal in a power distribution room. But when they tried to access it, they hit multiple security barriers. I can't get past these encryptions, Vex said, frustrated. Hannah smiled. Let me try something. She pulled out a small device from her shoe, something she'd managed to hide during her capture. It was a human-designed code breaker, much more advanced than anything the aliens expected. Within minutes, she had bypassed their security systems. Humans are good at thinking outside the box, she explained to Vex's amazed expression. As they moved from terminal to terminal, Hannah began to piece together disturbing information. Financial records, shipping manifests, and communication logs all pointed to something bigger than just a slave trading operation. 3 days later, Vex led Hannah deeper into the station than she had ever imagined possible. They crawled through maintenance shafts that seemed to go on forever, past humming machinery, and through areas where the artificial gravity flickered on and off. The air got colder as they went deeper, and Hannah could hear the distant rumble of the station's main power core. Where exactly are we going? She whispered as they squeezed through another narrow passage. The central data core, Vex replied quietly. It's where they keep all the important files. Most people don't even know it exists because it's buried, so deep in the station's structure. They finally emerged into a vast chamber filled with towering computer servers. The room was dimly lit, with thousands of blinking lights creating an almost hypnotic pattern. The servers hummed constantly, processing enormous amounts of data. Hannah had never seen anything like it. This is incredible, she breathed. These systems must contain information about every operation on the station. Vex leaned over her shoulder, reading along. What does this mean? Hannah's hands were shaking as she scrolled through the files. It means the auction wasn't really about selling slaves. It was about collecting genetic material from different species. The files revealed the horrifying truth. Species were categorized into different groups: premium, standard, and expendable. Humans were listed as premium, along with a few other rare species known for their intelligence and adaptability. Look at this, Hannah said, pointing to another section. They're not just taking individuals, they're targeting entire planets. The records showed dozens of worlds that had been secretly infiltrated. Small numbers of people from each planet were being taken, not enough to cause alarm, but enough to provide genetic samples. The captured individuals were being used to create clones, while their genetic material was being processed into enhancement serums. Enhancement serums? Vex asked. Drugs that give other species the beneficial traits of the captured species. Human intelligence, Vorthan longevity, Kalani endurance. They're literally stealing what makes each species unique and selling it to the highest bidder. But the worst part was yet to come. As Hannah dug deeper into the files, she discovered that her own capture had been carefully planned. They knew I was coming, she said, her voice barely a whisper. My diplomatic mission was a setup. They wanted me specifically because I'm a geneticist. They thought if they could capture someone who understood genetics, they could improve their cloning process. Vex looked horrified. You mean they were never planning to sell you? I was bait. They knew Earth's government would send rescue missions to find me. Each rescue attempt would bring them more humans to capture. They've been using this strategy on dozens of worlds. The files showed the full scope of their operation, entire secret facilities dedicated to cloning, underground markets where enhancement serums were sold to wealthy aliens who wanted to become stronger, smarter, or live longer. And most disturbing of all, plans to expand the operation to include direct invasion of primitive worlds. Vex, this isn't just about slavery, or even genetic theft. They're planning to wipe out entire species and replace them with clones they can control. As they copied the files onto portable storage devices, Hannah realized that what they had discovered was bigger than just one space station. This was a galactic conspiracy involving some of the most powerful beings in known space. "We have to get this information out," she said urgently. "If we don't stop them, they'll eventually target every inhabited world in the galaxy." But even as they gathered the evidence, alarms began to sound in the distance. Someone had discovered their infiltration. The alarms were getting louder, and Hannah knew they didn't have much time before security teams would flood the data core. As they gathered the last of the evidence files, her mind was already working on their next move. "Vex, we need to slow them down somehow," she said, stuffing the storage devices into her pockets. "Even if we get this information out, they'll just destroy the evidence and move their operation somewhere else. What can we do? There are thousands of security guards on this station, and we're just 2 people." Hannah looked around at all the computer servers humming around them. "We don't need to fight them directly. We just need to create enough chaos to buy ourselves time." She moved to another terminal and began accessing the station's environmental control systems. Years of studying alien biology had taught her exactly how different species needed different atmospheric conditions to function properly. "What are you doing?" Vex asked nervously as the sound of boots echoed in the corridors above them. "Every species on this station needs a specific mix of gases to breathe comfortably," Hannah explained as her fingers flew over the controls. "The Thurians need high oxygen levels. The crystal beings require trace amounts of xenon gas. The reptilian saurons need extra nitrogen." She began making subtle adjustments to the atmospheric processes that supplied air to different sections of the station. "Not enough to hurt anyone, but just enough to make them extremely uncomfortable. I'm adjusting the mixtures just slightly in each zone. Within an hour, every alien on this station is going to feel like they have a bad case of altitude sickness. That will affect everyone, including us," Vex pointed out. "Humans are incredibly adaptable. We can function in a much wider range of atmospheric conditions than most species. It's one of the reasons they wanted to harvest our genetic material. They escaped from the data core just as security teams arrived. But instead of heading back to Vex's quarters, Hannah insisted they visit the maintenance workers' common areas. The lower levels of the station were like a completely different world. Here, dozens of different species worked together, all of them considered lesser beings by the wealthy aliens above. There were more Kalani like Vex, but also small furry creatures called Pitex, tall thin beings called Striders, and others that Hannah didn't recognize. Most of them were exhausted from long shifts maintaining the station's systems. They lived in cramped quarters and ate basic food while the wealthy aliens above enjoyed luxury. "These are my people," Vex said quietly, as they entered a large common room where workers were gathering for their evening meal. "They work hard, but they're treated like they don't matter." Hannah watched as Vex began moving from table to table, speaking quietly to small groups of workers. At first they looked skeptical. After all, this was the same Vex who had always kept his head down and avoided trouble. But as he shared what they had discovered, their expressions changed. "You're telling us they're stealing people from entire planets?" asked a female Pitek, her fur standing on end with anger. "Not just stealing," Vex replied. "They're planning to replace whole species with clones they can control. Today it's humans and other premium species. Tomorrow it could be any of us." The news spread quickly through the maintenance network. Workers who had spent years being ignored and treated poorly suddenly had something to fight for. Many of them had been taken from their homeworlds under false pretenses, promised good jobs, but then trapped in endless servitude. Meanwhile, Hannah's atmospheric sabotage was starting to take effect throughout the upper levels of the station. She could hear it in the emergency communications that Vex's maintenance friends were intercepting. Security teams were reporting that wealthy aliens were becoming sluggish and confused. Some were demanding to know why their private atmospheric systems weren't working properly. The Thurian Council is calling for emergency technicians, reported a Strider worker who monitored communication systems. They're saying their meeting room feels like they're breathing through thick soup. Perfect, Hana said with satisfaction. Confused enemies make mistakes, but the real breakthrough came when the workers began sharing their own stories. It turned out that many of them had noticed strange things happening on the station, unusual shipments, restricted areas they weren't allowed to maintain, and wealthy aliens asking odd questions about their home worlds and families. I always wondered why they asked so many questions about my family's genetics when they hired me, said one Kalani worker. Now it makes sense. They weren't interested in my work skills. They wanted information about my entire species. As the evening went on, what had started as a small group of allies grew into something much larger. Workers from every species and every department were coming together, united by the realization that they were all being used for something far more sinister than simple labor. The revolution was beginning, and it was starting from the bottom up. By the next morning, chaos was spreading through the upper levels of Nexus Station like wildfire. The atmospheric problems had left most of the wealthy aliens feeling sick and confused, while the maintenance workers moved through the lower levels with a new sense of purpose. Hana knew this was their moment. She had gathered enough evidence to expose Project Genesis, but she needed to get the information out to the galaxy before station security could stop her. The problem was that all the main communication arrays were heavily guarded and located in restricted areas. There's a backup transmission station in Section C7, Vex told her, as they huddled in a maintenance closet, planning their next move. It's used for emergency broadcasts, but it can reach communication networks across multiple star systems. Can you get us there? Yes, but Hana, once we start transmitting, they'll know exactly where we are. Every security team on the station will come after us. She looked at him seriously. Then we better make sure this broadcast counts. They made their way through service tunnels toward Section C7, but they weren't alone. Word had spread through the maintenance network, and workers from every department were quietly moving into position throughout the station. What had started as a simple investigation had grown into something much bigger. The backup transmission station was in a small, cramped room filled with old but functional communication equipment. Hana quickly connected her storage devices and began uploading the Project Genesis files to every major news network and government communication system she could reach. Galactic Emergency Broadcast, she announced, as cameras began recording. This is Dr. Hana Kim of Earth's Deep Intelligence Division. I'm transmitting from Nexus Station with evidence of a criminal conspiracy that threatens every inhabited world in the galaxy. She held up one of the storage devices. The files I'm about to release show proof that wealthy aliens have been secretly harvesting genetic material from what they call lesser species across dozens of worlds. They're creating clones and enhancement drugs, planning to eventually replace entire populations with beings they can control. As she spoke, the evidence files were automatically broadcasting across the galaxy. Images of secret cloning facilities, financial records showing payment for genetic material, and communication logs between conspirators were being transmitted to every major government and news organization. My capture was not accidental, Hana continued. I allowed myself to be taken as part of a deep cover operation to expose this conspiracy. The auction you may have heard about was never intended to actually sell prisoners. It was a cover for genetic harvesting operations. Suddenly, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridors outside their small room. They've found us, Vex said, his voice tight with fear. On the security monitors, they could see armed Thurian guards rushing through the corridors. But they could also see something else. Groups of maintenance workers were moving through other parts of the station, no longer hiding or keeping their heads down. The door to their room exploded inward, and Station Commander Borak himself stepped through, flanked by a dozen heavily armed guards. The massive Thurian's eyes blazed with fury as he saw Hana still broadcasting. "End this transmission immediately," he growled, "or I'll have you executed where you stand." Hana looked directly into the camera. "This is Commander Borak of Nexus Station. As you can see, they're willing to kill to keep their crimes secret." "Kill her," Borak roared. But before his guards could raise their weapons, the lights went out. In the darkness, they could hear the sound of fighting in the corridors. Emergency lighting flickered on, revealing that maintenance workers had cut power to this entire section of the station. "The uprising has begun," Vex said with pride in his voice. Through the station's communication system, they could hear reports coming in from every level. Maintenance workers were taking control of critical systems throughout Nexus Station. They had shut down artificial gravity in the wealthy quarters, locked security teams out of their own armories, and flooded several detention areas to free other prisoners. "This is impossible," Borak snarled. "These are just janitors and repair workers. These are people who know every pipe, every cable, and every system on this station," Hana replied, still broadcasting, "and they're tired of being treated like they don't matter." More explosions echoed throughout the station, as the workers systematically took control of power systems, life support, and communication arrays. What had seemed like a small group of rebels was revealing itself to be a coordinated network that spanned the entire station. The revolution wasn't just beginning, it was succeeding. "You taught us something important," Vex said to Hana as chaos erupted around them. "You showed us that even when the odds seem impossible, humans never give up. And now, neither will we." The broadcast continued, carrying their message of resistance across the galaxy, inspiring others who had been oppressed to stand up and fight back. Commander Borak's guards were advancing through the darkened corridors, their heavy boots echoing off the metal walls. But Hana wasn't panicking like they expected. Instead, she was studying the room around them with the focused intensity that had made her one of Earth's top scientists. "Vex, I need you to connect me to the station's maintenance droid network," she said calmly, even as laser fire erupted. "In the hallway outside, the cleaning robots. What good will those do against armed guards? Trust me. Humans are good at seeing possibilities where others see problems." While Vex worked frantically at a control panel, Hana began gathering seemingly random items from around the room: old power cables, cleaning supplies, even a broken coffee maker that someone had left behind. To anyone watching, it looked like she was just grabbing junk. "Got it," Vex announced. "I'm connected to the maintenance network." Hana's fingers flew across the interface, rapidly reprogramming the simple cleaning droids that roamed the station's corridors. These robots were designed to be invisible, small, quiet machines that worked while everyone else was sleeping. "What are you doing to them?" Vex asked, watching lines of code scroll across the screen. "I'm teaching them to be more than just cleaners," Hana replied with a grin. Within minutes, the maintenance droids throughout the station began behaving very differently. Instead of quietly cleaning floors, they started working together in coordinated groups. Some blocked doorways by wedging themselves into the frames. Others began spraying cleaning chemicals in the faces of security guards, temporarily blinding them. But the most clever trick was what Hana did with the cargo lifting droids. These larger robots were designed to move heavy equipment, but now they began picking up security guards and gently but firmly depositing them in storage closets, then sealing the doors. "This is incredible," Vex breathed, watching the security feeds as confused guards found themselves trapped by robots they had ignored for years. "That's just the beginning," Hana said, turning her attention to the pile of junk she had collected, using wire from the broken coffee maker, chemicals from cleaning supplies, and components from old electronics. She began assembling what looked like a complex puzzle, but Vex realized it was actually a sophisticated jamming device. "How do you know how to build that?" "Human education doesn't just focus on one subject," Hana explained as she worked. "We learn physics, chemistry, engineering, biology. Everything connects. When you understand how things work, you can make them work differently." She activated the device, and immediately the guards' communication systems began failing. Their coordinated attacks fell apart as teams lost contact with each other. But the real breakthrough came when Hana accessed the station's security system itself. Instead of trying to break through the security barriers, she did something the system designers never expected. She convinced the security system that the guards were actually the intruders. "I'm changing the identification protocols," she explained to Vex. "Now the station's own security system thinks the maintenance workers are authorized personnel, and the guards are trespassers." Automated security doors began slamming shut in Front of advancing guard units. Stun fields activated when guards tried to enter restricted areas. The station's own defenses were now working against the people who had controlled them for years. Throughout the station, the revolt was spreading beyond just the maintenance workers. The PTEC food service workers had taken control of the cafeterias and were refusing to feed the guards. The Strider data technicians had locked down the computer systems. Even the Kalani cleaning staff were using their access to every room to help coordinate the resistance. "Look at this," Vex said, pointing to incoming reports on his portable communicator. "Section D is reporting that the crystal beings in the detention cells have joined the uprising. They're using their natural ability to focus light to disable security cameras." Hana smiled as she watched her improvised weapons and reprogrammed systems create chaos throughout the station. "This is what makes humans dangerous to oppressors," she said. "We don't just accept the way things are. We see how things could be different, and we make it happen." A group of guards tried to break through their barricaded door, but the cleaning droids had covered the floor with a slippery mixture of soap and oil. The heavily armored guards slipped and slid helplessly while tiny cleaning robots buzzed around them like angry bees. "The rebellion isn't just about fighting," Hana continued. "It's about showing everyone that they don't have to accept being treated as less than they are. Every species has strengths that their oppressors have overlooked." The tide of the battle was turning, and it was turning because of human ingenuity, combined with the courage of beings who had finally decided they'd had enough. Within 6 hours, the impossible had happened. Nexus Station, one of the most heavily guarded trading posts in the galaxy, had fallen to a group of janitors, maintenance workers, and cleaning staff. The wealthy aliens who had controlled the station for decades were now locked in their own detention cells, while the beings they had treated as property walked free through the corridors. Hana stood in the main command center, watching as Vex and other former workers coordinated the final stages of their takeover. It was amazing to see how quickly they had learned to work together once they realized their own worth. "Incoming transmission," announced a Strider technician who was now operating the communication systems. "Multiple galactic authority ships are requesting permission to dock." "Let them come," Hana replied. "We have nothing to hide anymore." The evidence of Project Genesis had been broadcasting across the galaxy for hours. News networks were reporting the story on every inhabited world, and governments were demanding investigations into similar operations in their own territories. The conspiracy that had operated in secret for years was now exposed for everyone to see. When the galactic peacekeeping forces boarded the station, they found something they had never expected. Instead of chaos and destruction, they discovered a well-organized group of former prisoners who had carefully preserved all the evidence of the crimes committed against them. "This is unprecedented," said Captain Zorix, the lead investigator, as he reviewed the files Hana had compiled. "We've suspected illegal genetic harvesting for years, but we never had proof. This evidence will shut down operations on dozens of worlds." But the most surprising moment came when the authorities tried to arrest everyone involved in the uprising. "These beings participated in an illegal revolt," one of the officials declared. "They must face trial for their actions." Hana stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly through the command center. "Under Galactic Law Article 12, the same law I invoked during the auction, any being has the right to defend themselves against illegal imprisonment and genetic harvesting. Everything done here was in self-defense." The officials looked uncomfortable. The evidence was clear that Project Genesis had been violating dozens of galactic laws, and the public was already viewing the maintenance workers as heroes rather than criminals. 3 days later, as legal proceedings continued, a familiar sound echoed through the station's docking bays. Hana smiled as she recognized the distinctive hum of human ship engines. Earth's government had finally sent the rescue mission they had promised, but when Captain Torres of the Earth Defense Force arrived to collect Hana, he found her in the middle of an unexpected conversation. "I want to offer all of you sanctuary on Earth," Hana was saying to a gathered crowd of former workers. "Not because we need laborers or servants, but because you've proven that you have the courage to fight for what's right." Vex looked overwhelmed. "You would welcome us to your homeworld, even though we're considered inferior species by most of the galaxy." Humans don't judge people by their species or their status, Hannah replied firmly. We judge them by their actions and their character. You organized one of the most successful peaceful revolts in galactic history. You freed not just yourselves, but potentially millions of others across the galaxy. That's the kind of courage we respect. Many of the former workers accepted her offer, but others had different plans. Some wanted to return to their homeworlds to share what they had learned. Others decided to stay and help transform Nexus Station into a legitimate trading post where all species would be treated equally. So what about you? Hannah asked Vex as they prepared to board the human ship. I think I'd like to see Earth, he said with a shy smile. I want to learn more about this human idea that everyone deserves to choose their own path. As their ship departed, Nexus Station, Hannah looked back at the massive structure through the viewport. It looked the same from the outside, but everything inside had changed. The auction halls were being converted into meeting rooms, where different species could trade as equals. The detention cells were being turned into temporary housing for refugees. The command centers were now operated by councils that included representatives from every species. You know what the most important thing we accomplished was? Hannah said to Vex as they watched the station grow smaller in the distance. Stopping Project Genesis? That was important, but not the most important thing. She turned to face him. We proved that when people are given the freedom to choose, they choose to stand together rather than tear each other apart. Captain Torres joined them at the viewport. The Galactic Council is already passing new laws based on your evidence. They're calling it the Freedom of Choice Act. Hannah nodded with satisfaction. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't winning a battle. It's proving that everyone deserves the right to decide their own destiny. As their ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying them toward Earth and a new beginning, the story of Nexus Station spread throughout the galaxy. It became a symbol that even the most powerless people could change the universe when they worked together and refused to accept injustice. The auction had ended, but the real choosing had just begun.